a deep dive into the Rwandan Genocide of 1994. In the spring of 1994, Rwanda, a small and picturesque East African nation, became the site of one of the deadliest genocides in modern history. In a span of just 100 days, an unimaginable 800,000 people, predominantly members of the Tutsi minority, were brutally murdered. This violence unfolded not as a spontaneous eruption, but as the culmination of years of hatred, systemic discrimination, and political tension. This documentary aims to take you on a journey through these events, not to sensationalize the tragedy, but to understand its roots, honor its victims, and reflect on the critical lessons it imparts. Through archival footage, expert insights, and survivor testimonies, we will delve into the origins of the Rwandan genocide, the failure of the global response, and Rwanda's painstaking path toward reconciliation. In this exploration, the overriding lesson becomes clear. Hatred, when left unchecked, can unleash unimaginable horrors. Rwanda's tragedy did not emerge out of nowhere. To understand the genocide of 1994, one must look back to the nation's pre-colonial and colonial history. For centuries, the people of Rwanda were organized by social classes rather than ethnic divisions. The Hutu, Tutsi, and Twa coexisted, often intermarrying. Social mobility between these groups was possible, based largely on wealth and societal roles. However, with European colonization came new systems of classification. First, under German and later Belgian rule, colonial authorities viewed Rwanda through their own ethnic and racial biases. The Tutsi, who were often cattle herders and wealthier than the Hutu majority, were deemed racially superior by the colonizers. This hierarchy was formalized when the Belgians introduced identity cards in the early 20th century, cementing ethnic labels and deepening divisions between Hutu and Tutsi. By the time Rwanda gained independence in 1962, these colonial policies had sown the seeds of resentment and mistrust. The post-independence government, led by the Hutu majority, sought to overturn decades of perceived oppression, yet it also fanned the flames of ethnic resentment. Violence against Tutsis became commonplace, and many were forced into exile in neighboring countries, a situation that would later play a critical role in the events of 1994. After independence, Rwanda's politics became dominated by ethnically charged conflicts. Over the decades, several waves of violence against the Tutsi population led to a mass exodus of refugees who crossed borders into Uganda, Burundi, and the Congo. By the 1980s, these exiled communities began organizing themselves politically and militarily. This culminated in the formation of the Rwandan Patriotic Front, RPF, a Tutsi-dominated rebel group aimed at reclaiming their homeland. In 1990, the RPF launched an armed invasion of Rwanda, sparking a civil war. Though a fragile ceasefire was later brokered, tensions remained dangerously high. Simultaneously, Rwanda's socioeconomic conditions deteriorated. Overpopulation, a declining economy, and political corruption compounded frustrations among the masses. Hutu power extremists capitalized on this unrest, spreading propaganda that demonized the Tutsi as enemies of the state. The atmosphere was further poisoned by media outlets like Radio Television Libre des Mille Collines, RTLM, which broadcast hate-filled narratives dehumanizing the Tutsi population. As fears escalated, the groundwork for coordinated mass violence was laid. April 6, 1994 marked the beginning of the end. On this day, a plane carrying Rwandan President Juvénal Habyarimana, a Hutu, was shot down near Kigali Airport. It remains uncertain who was responsible, but Hutu extremists quickly placed the blame on the Tutsi population. This event became the spark in an already explosive situation. Within hours of the president's death, roadblocks appeared in Kigali, manned by armed militias. Lists of Tutsi targets, compiled long before the incident, were handed out. Militias like the Interahamwe began systematically slaughtering Tutsi civilians and moderate Hutus who opposed the government. What unfolded next was not random or chaotic violence. It was calculated and deliberate. The killings were organized at the national and local levels, with government officials, military leaders, and even clergy playing active roles. The brutality of the Rwandan genocide is almost unfathomable. Entire families were wiped out, often by neighbors, friends, or even relatives. Weapons of choice were machetes, clubs, and other household tools, highlighting the deeply personal nature of the violence. Estimates indicate that during certain periods of the genocide, up to 10,000 people were murdered each day. Women and young girls were often subjected to systematic sexual violence. Rape was used as a weapon of war to dehumanize and destroy communities emotionally and physically. Thousands sought refuge in churches, community centers, and schools, mistakenly believing these institutions would offer safety. Instead, these locations became slaughterhouses where people were massacred en masse. Amidst this horror, there were, however, quiet acts of courage. Hutu individuals who risked their lives to hide and protect their Tutsi neighbors proved that empathy can persist even in the darkest of circumstances. As the bodies piled up, the international response fell tragically short. Early warnings of impending genocide were ignored by world powers. Despite credible evidence of the unfolding atrocities, the United Nations and Western governments downplayed the events, framing them as part of a civil war rather than an orchestrated genocide. Peacekeeping forces already stationed in Rwanda were vastly outnumbered and hampered by restrictive mandates. When 10 Belgian peacekeepers were murdered early in the conflict, most foreign personnel were evacuated, leaving the Rwandan people almost entirely alone. This inaction was in large part due to reluctance among world leaders to intervene militarily or label the crisis as a genocide, a designation that might have triggered legal obligations for action under international law. Rwanda was therefore abandoned during its darkest hour. Amidst the violence, individual stories of survival bear witness to the resilience of the human spirit. Survivors recall hiding for days in forests, rivers, or the basements of strangers, listening to the screams of loved ones being killed. One survivor describes her narrow escape after being sheltered by a Hutu family. She explains how the family faced threats, yet they continued to offer her protection, refusing to yield to the pressures of the genocide. Stories like this, though faint glimmers of hope, stand as a testament to the bravery and compassion that persisted amidst the violence. Others speak of the unimaginable losses, entire families wiped out in minutes. For many survivors, the immediate aftermath was almost as harrowing as the genocide itself, as they grappled with trauma, displacement, and the pain of rebuilding shattered lives. The genocide formally ended in July 1994, when the RPF, under Paul Kagame's leadership, captured Kigali and declared victory. Hutu forces and civilians fled en masse to neighboring countries, further destabilizing the region. In the immediate wake of the genocide, Rwanda was a nation of widows, orphans, and unmarked graves. Survivors faced the colossal task of rebuilding, emotionally, economically, and socially. To address the atrocities, Rwanda adopted a dual approach to justice. At the international level, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, ICTR, prosecuted high-ranking officials responsible for the genocide. Domestically, the community-based Gakaka courts aimed to foster reconciliation by trying lower-level offenders and promoting dialogue between perpetrators and survivors. Reconciliation has been central to Rwanda's recovery. The government has worked to eliminate ethnic labels and promote national unity. Programs for trauma recovery and remembrance, including genocide memorials, play a critical role in preserving the memory of what transpired. Still, the scars of 1994 remain. For survivors, every day is a testament to endurance. The Rwandan genocide is not only a historical tragedy, but also a chilling wake-up call. It reminds us of the consequences of unchecked hatred and dehumanization. The international community's failure to act reveals the dangers of indifference, apathy, and bureaucracy in the face of escalating violence. Today, Rwanda stands as a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The nation has made incredible progress, becoming an economic and social success story in Africa. Yet, this forward momentum does not erase the pain of the past. It reinforces the need to prevent such horrors from recurring. As we conclude, we remember those who were lost. We honor the survivors who continue to endure and rebuild, and most importantly, we carry forward the lessons of 1994. Hatred can metastasize quickly, but so too can compassion. It is a call to vigilance for Rwanda and the world.